how much approximately doctors make in America? College fees for the doctor's degree કેટલી હોય છે પર યર? તમે જે એકવાર ગ્રેજ્યુએટ થઈ જાઓ પછી ટિપિકલી ગેપ યર હોય છે. માય નેક્સ્ટ ક્વેશ્ચન ઇઝ હાઉ ટુ સિલેક્ટ ધ રાઇટ કોલેજ. MBBS જેવું કશું હોતું નથી અમેરિકામાં. નમસ્કાર દર્શક મિત્રો, મારું નામ અમિત છે ને હું અમેરિકાથી જાગ્યા ત્યારથી ભાગ્યા તમારી ગુજરાતી ચેનલ પર તમારું પાછું સ્વાગત કરું છું. આજે એક ખાસ પોડકાસ્ટ બનાવી રહ્યો છું હું એ લોકો માટે કે જેઓ અમેરિકાની અંદર ડૉક્ટર બનવા માંગે છે. આપણી જોડે આજે સ્પેશિયલ ગેસ્ટ જોડાવાના છે. તેમનું નામ છે જય પટેલ. તે અત્યારે મેડિકલ સ્કૂલમાં છે અને સેકન્ડ યરમાં છે યુનિવર્સિટી ઓફ શિકાગોમાં. તેમણે ઘણા બધા સ્ટુડન્ટ્સને હેલ્પ પણ કરી છે એપ્લિકેશન પ્રોસેસમાં, અને તેમની પાસે ઘણું બધું નોલેજ છે કે અમેરિકામાં ડૉક્ટર કઈ રીતે બનવું, ડૉક્ટરની લાઈફ કેવી હોય છે, ડૉક્ટરને કેટલા પૈસા મળતા હોય છે ડૉક્ટર બન્યા પછી. એ બધી જ બાબતો હું તેમને પૂછીશ આ વિડીયોમાં. મોસ્ટલી તેમના જવાબો અંગ્રેજીમાં હશે કારણ કે તે અહીંયા જ ગ્રોઅપ થયા છે, એટલે વચ્ચે વચ્ચે જ્યાં જરૂર લાગશે ત્યાં સ્વાદ અનુસાર હું ગુજરાતીમાં મારી ટિપ્પણી કરતો રહીશ. જે લોકોને પણ ડૉક્ટર બનવું છે, ઇન્ફોર્મેશન જોઈએ છે ડૉક્ટર બનવાની અમેરિકામાં, તેના માટે આ વિડીયો ખાસ કામ લાગશે. તો તમે લોકો ફરીથી જાગ્યા ત્યારથી ભાગ્યામાં જોડાયા છો તેના માટે હું તમને ફરીથી થેન્ક યુ કહેવા માગું છું. તો બોલાવીએ આપણે આજના ગેસ્ટ જય પટેલને. હું એમને અત્યારથી જ કહું છું ડૉક્ટર જય પટેલ. ઓલરાઈટ મિત્રો, તો આપણી જોડે જોડાઈ ગયા છે જય પટેલ આપણી સાથે છે. જય, થેન્ક યુ સો મચ ફોર કમિંગ હિયર.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, mate. I'm happy to share my experiences.
આજે હું બહુ જ એક્સાઇટ છું. આજે આપણને જાણવા મળશે કે અમેરિકામાં ડૉક્ટર કઈ રીતે બનાય છે. મારી પાસે ઘણા બધા પ્રશ્નો છે જય માટે, અને આજના વિડીયોમાં હું આ બધા જ પ્રશ્નો જયને પૂછીશ અને એમની પાસેથી જે જવાબ મળશે તેના પરથી આપણને ગાઈડન્સ મળશે કે અમેરિકાની અંદર ડૉક્ટર બનવાની એકચ્યુઅલ પ્રોસેસ શું છે. તો વધારે ટાઈમ ના લેતા પ્રશ્નો અને જવાબોનો સિલસિલો આ પોડકાસ્ટમાં આપણે ચાલુ કરીએ છીએ. સૌથી પહેલો પ્રશ્ન તો મારો એ છે કે જે અમેરિકાની અંદર સ્કૂલની જે સિસ્ટમ હોય છે 1 to 12 ગ્રેડ સુધીની, એ પછી શું કરવાનું હોય છે ડૉક્ટર બનવા માટે? વોટ ઇઝ ધ એકચ્યુઅલ સ્ટેપ્સ યુ હેવ ટુ ટેક આફ્ટર યુ ગેટ ધ હાઈ સ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા?
Yeah, so there are a lot of years of schooling involved with becoming a medical doctor in the United States. And so when you're looking at becoming a medical doctor in the United States, you typically want to go to a graduate medical school program, which you would get an MD or DO, doctoral degree. And after that, you would do a residency or fellowship. So in the grand picture, like grand scheme picture of things, you're looking at, your grades 1 through 12. And so once you finish high school, you want to apply to college. And in college, you're considered a pre-medical school student, which is basically a student who has the intention of applying to medical school. And so you can actually major in anything in college. So once you get your bachelor's degree, which is 4 years after high school, you go to medical school, which is an additional 4 years. And so that's 8 years so far. And after that, you have your MD or DO degree, or a medical doctor, but you still need to do training. And so you have to do residency and sometimes a fellowship too. And that can, vary between 3 to up to 9 years, depending on what you do.
આઈ સી. એટલે આના પરથી મને એકચ્યુઅલીમાં બે પ્રશ્નો છે. એક તો આખું જે ડૉક્ટર બનવાની પ્રોસેસ છે આફ્ટર હાઈ સ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા, ઇટ કુડ ટેક ફ્રોમ 8 years to 10 years, રાઈટ? આફ્ટર હાઈ સ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા you do graduation for 3-4 years, and then another 4 years medical school, and then residency for a couple of years.
Yeah, so 4 years bachelor's, 4 years medical school, then
and
3 to 7 years of training.
3 to 7 years of training?
Yeah.
So you are saying it will take like 10 to 14 years to become doctor after high school diploma?
Roughly, yeah, approximately.
તો મિત્રો, અમેરિકામાં ડૉક્ટર બનવા માટે હાઈસ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા પછી લગભગ 10 થી 14 વર્ષ સુધી તમારે આખું એજ્યુકેશન પૂરું કરવું પડે છે. હવે જય માટે મારો નેક્સ્ટ ક્વેશ્ચન એ છે કે જે આપણે 12મા ધોરણ પછી હાઈસ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા પછી જે કોલેજ કરતા હોઈએ છીએ, તો ઇન્ડિયામાં ખબર છે કે મેડિકલ સ્કૂલમાં ડાયરેક્ટ આપણે એડમિશન લેતા હોઈએ છીએ, પણ અમેરિકાની અંદર એક કોઈ પણ ડિગ્રી કરી શકો. સપોઝ આર્ટ્સમાં તમે ગ્રેજ્યુએટ થઈ જાઓ કાં તો એન્જિનિયર બની જાઓ તો પછી ડૉક્ટર બનાય કે નહીં એમની પાસેથી જાણીએ. સો વોટ ઇઝ ધ સે સપોઝ આઈ બીકમ ગ્રેજ્યુએટ ઇન આર્ટ્સ લાઈક સિનેમા or maybe I become engineer, 4 year graduation in engineer. Can I become doctor after that?
You can, and so to go to medical school, you can actually get any degree you want, like any bachelor's degree you want, like in history, music, engineering. But
Interesting.
the key is you have to spend some amount of time taking the required coursework for medical school, and so usually you have to take a mix of classes and general biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, and so as long as you take those classes, in addition to completing your bachelor's degree, as long as you take those required classes to apply to medical school, you can still go to medical school. And so, I've had friends who majored in, Spanish or, different majors, and they still went on, to go to medical school. So it's possible. You just need to take your requirements for medical school.
એટલે કે જયનું એવું કહેવું છે કે તમે સપોઝ લેંગ્વેજનું બી લીધું હોય, સ્પેનિશ લેંગ્વેજના ક્લાસ કર્યા હોય હાઈસ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા પછી, પણ તમે જો બાયોલોજી કે પછી માઇક્રોબાયોલોજી કે પછી કેમેસ્ટ્રી ઇઝ કન્સિડર્ડ, એવા કોર્સીસ જે ડૉક્ટર બનવા માટે રિક્વાયર્ડ છે તેના જે કોઈ અવર્સ છે એ તમે પૂરા કરેલા હોય અને તે તમે પાસ કરેલું હોય, you have to pass those things.
Yeah, right? Usually you have to do well, so like it's better to get higher grades in these.
Okay. તો તમે મેડિકલ સ્કૂલ માટે અપ્લાય કરી શકો છો, તમે પછી 12મા પછી ગમે તે કરેલું હોય. So that is something interesting. Is there a typical scoring you need for your graduation school that to get an admission into the medical school?
Yeah, so most of you probably have heard of the SAT. I think it's the Scholastic Aptitude Test. People take that standardized test, or almost every high school student takes it to go to college. And so likewise, to go to medical school, a lot of college students or people who have graduated college who want to apply to medical school, usually they take this standardized exam called the Medical College Admissions Test, which is
MCAT?
Also known as the MCAT. And so they take the MCAT. It's a 8-hour test now, I think 8.5 hours. So
8.5-hour test.
Yeah, but you get some breaks.
Breaks,
so,
okay, yeah, because we don't want to stay hungry, right?
So you have to take that test, and although there is no specific passing score, the higher you score, the higher your chance of admission to medical school. And so in the U.S., getting into like a U.S. MD like medical school is generally pretty competitive. Like I think every year around 50,000 students apply, and out of those, only about 38% gain at least one admission.
I see.
And so it is good to do well on the MCAT, and that's like one of the major tests determining whether or not you'll get in to medical school.
Thanks for that. So જયે એવું કીધું આપણને કે ગ્રેજ્યુએટ સ્કૂલ પૂરી થાય પછી MCAT કરીને એન્ટ્રન્સ ટેસ્ટ હોય છે તે આપવાની રહે છે, અને એમાં જો તમારો સ્કોર વધારે આવે તો તમારા મેડિકલ સ્કૂલમાં એડમિશન મળવાના ચાન્સીસ વધી જાય છે. એટલે જે ઓપન એન્ટ્રન્સ એક્ઝામ આપણે કહેતા હોઈએ છીએ તેમાં MCAT જે છે તેમાં તમારે સારું સ્કોરિંગ કરવું પડે.
And just to clarify, like in the US, they usually call it, I know in other countries they call it like graduate program, but we call it undergraduate. And so I guess the graduate's like post like bachelor's. So after you get bachelor's, the medical school is the graduate school.
I see.
The college is the undergraduate. And so you haven't graduated college yet. And so the terminology is a little bit different in the US, so that's what they refer to it as.
I see. તો જયનું એવું કેવું છે કે આપણે 12મા ધોરણ પછી જે કોલેજમાં જઈએ છીએ તેને ઇન્ડિયામાં આપણે ગ્રેજ્યુએટ સ્કૂલ કહેતા હોઈએ છીએ, જ્યારે અમેરિકાની અંદર હાઈસ્કૂલ ડિપ્લોમા પછી તમે જે 4 વર્ષનું એન્જિનિયરિંગ કે કોઈ પણ કોર્સ કરો તો તેને એ લોકો અંડર ગ્રેજ્યુએટ ગણતા હોય છે, અને પછી જે તમે કરો તેને એ લોકો ગ્રેજ્યુએટ કોર્સ ગણતા હોય છે, right?
Yeah.
What is the application process and the timing? Once you have a good score in MCAT, how do you apply? Like, how do you select which college to apply?
Yeah, so when you're a college student, so if you graduate college and you're looking to apply to medical school, it's actually a very long process, and so you want to get started early, and that's the key, because it's not just the MCAT and your grades. They also want to see a lot of these medical schools, because it's competitive. They want to see that you have clinical experience. So it's like the analogy is commonly they say like medical school is expensive. If some private schools can cost upward $400,000 over 4 years, so it's very expensive. And so would you look inside a house without before you buy it? Of course you would, right? And so they want you to see that you've done some shadowing, maybe you worked in the hospital a little bit, and so they want to see that you've kind of looked through that landscape of the what it's like to be a physician, what the job entails, because they don't want to admit people who don't know like what they're getting themselves into. And so because medical training is long, they want to make sure you have clinical experience. It's also good to have some volunteering, research.
That's good information.
But the short answer to your question is the application process. So the whole application takes a year, and so the application opens in roughly end of May, and so
End of May, okay.
you write your essays, you submit it to different schools, and it's a year-long process. And so usually in August or September, different schools will send you interview invitations.
Okay.
You'll come to their school, or nowadays maybe even Zoom, and you interview with medical school, like admissions people, and they send acceptances throughout the year, but then the following fall. And so let's say I applied the spring of 2022, and I know that's
which is
already passed.
Spring is gone.
I wouldn't start right now. I'd be interviewing for medical schools, and I wouldn't start until the fall of 2023. And so it's a year-long process, because I'd be interviewing throughout this whole year, and then you make your decision by the next spring. So it's a long process.
I just have a question based on that. So you lose 1 year in between, like after you become graduate from a school.
Yeah.
You wait for a year to get into the medical school, so that's kind of a waste.
It's actually, so you can apply during your third year of college, and so if you want to go straight to medical school after your undergraduate college, your bachelor's degree, you can apply during your third year. And so it's actually common now. I think the median or average age of the entering like medical students like 24 now, and so it's common to take a year or two off, because a lot of students do research, they work some jobs, and it is hard to get in. So it is good to people like to build up their CV in that time. So it's not uncommon. People still like to work some jobs or get some more clinical experience, study for the MCAT, and so it's more common in the U.S. for a lot of students to take they're known as gap years. So after they get their bachelor's, they might spend a year or two, and because the whole application is a whole year, it's beneficial sometimes just to take some extra time and
I see. So you recommend that rather than applying on third year of your graduation, just wait, just get some experience and then apply after.
It depends.
After you're done with
usually people who take time off, they're stronger applicants if they want to go to a more selective school, or it's
to study
varies.
more and all those things.
It varies depending on the person. Some people, if you're preparing since high school and you're ready to apply during your third year of college and you have a lot of clinical experience, you've done the MCAT, but I found that it is tougher to do it that way, but it is common people take your time off. And I think at my medical school, which is about 90 students, I think a third, so about 30 students did not take any years off. Another third took about 1 year off.
That's a good information.
Another third took about 2 or more years off after college.
2 or more years off. Okay.
Yeah.
તો જયનું એવું કેવું છે કે તમે જે એકવાર ગ્રેજ્યુએટ થઈ જાઓ પછી ટિપિકલી ગેપ યર હોય છે, એટલે એમાં વર્ષનો જેટલો ટાઈમ લાગતો હોય છે એપ્લિકેશન પ્રોસેસમાં, અને તમારું CV બિલ્ડ કરવા માટે તમારે બધા હોસ્પિટલમાં તમે એક્સપિરિયન્સ કરેલો હોય એ બધું જરૂરી છે. અને સૌથી અગત્યની વસ્તુ એ છે કે એ લોકો જ્યારે તમારો ઇન્ટરવ્યૂ લે છે ત્યારે એ લોકો ચેક કરે છે કે તમારો ઇન્ટેન્શન શું છે અને તમે ખરેખર ડૉક્ટર બનવાને લાયક છો કે નહીં, તો જ તમને એ લોકો એડમિશન કદાચ આપશે. અને થર્ડ યરથી પણ તમે અપ્લાય કરી શકો છો, જેથી કરીને તમારું 1 વર્ષ ના બગડે. હવે હું ખાલી એક ઇન્ડિયન મેન્ટાલિટી કે મારી મેન્ટાલિટી જે ગણું એ કરો કે હું હોઉં એઝ અ સ્ટુડન્ટ તો હું પેલો ગેપ યર છે એમાં ના પડું, કારણ કે આઈ વોન્ટ ટુ બીકમ ગ્રેજ્યુએટ ઓર વોટ એવર, આઈ વોન્ટ ટુ બીકમ ડોક્ટર sooner rather than waiting for a year or so. Because I feel like 1 year is too much time to waste for me. So it's all individual, I guess so, right? I mean, situation to situation it depends. પણ ટિપિકલી અહીંના છોકરાઓ 1 વર્ષ આખી એપ્લિકેશન પ્રોસેસમાં ગેપ લેતા હોય છે. તેમાં એ લોકો એક્સપિરિયન્સ ગેઇન કરતા હોય છે, કશે ઇન્ડસ્ટ્રીમાં કામ કરીને, હોસ્પિટલમાં કામ કરીને, અને જે એન્ટ્રન્સની એક્ઝામ હોય છે એની તૈયારી કરતા હોય છે, અને ઇન્ટરવ્યૂની તૈયારી કરતા હોય છે, અને રીડિંગ ને બધું કરતા હોય છે ડૉક્ટર બનવા માટે. So that's a good information. Thank you. My next question is how to select the right college. Total કેટલી colleges હશે approximately?
In the US, if you're just looking at MD schools, it's about 125, I want to say.
125 is, I think it's not a big number.
It's not
for
a big
US.
Number. Each keep in mind, each school is also less than 200 students, and so.
Oh wow! So that's
when you have like 50,
not too many, I would say.
Not too many, but then there's also like DO schools, which is similar to MD schools. There's I think that's 60 of them or something. So total less than 200. Each, most schools having around 100 to 200 students, I think.
So here is my next question. Okay, what's the difference between MD and DO?
That's a good question. So people tend to think DOs like schools. It's the same.
What
thing.
is DO?
DO is Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine.
Osteopathic medicine?
Yeah, MD is just I think it just stands for medical doctor. Technically, DOs DO schools are a bit easier to get into. So it's still hard to get an acceptance to, but it's a little bit easier. I think in terms of like training, it's very similar. DOs do some additional training in what's called like OMM, so osteopathic manipulation or something. It's some additional training they get throughout their 4 years, and they take some additional exams too, based on the additional things they learned. But generally, if you want to be a medical doctor in the U.S., MD or DO is fine. If certain specialties, like if you want to go into like neurosurgery or plastic surgery or dermatology, it's better, it's easier if you're an MD student. These schools tend to have more resources, like the MD, they have more funding, and so there's more opportunities for research and things like that. And so it's a bit easier for MD students who graduate with an MD to go into those specialties. But generally, they're
harder for DO.
A little bit harder, yeah.
Okay.
But generally the same. So if you go see a doctor, like a family medicine doctor, MD, DO, same training more or less. And so
તો જયનું એવું કેવું છે કે જો તમારે સ્પેશિયાલિસ્ટ બનવું હોય, ડૉક્ટરની ડિગ્રી મેળવ્યા પછી તો MD કરેલું હોય તો વધારે સારું રહેશે. જેમ કે તમારે હાર્ટ સર્જન બનવું છે કે સર્જરીના સ્પેશિયાલિસ્ટ બનવું છે કે પ્લાસ્ટિક સર્જન બનવું છે તો MD કરેલું હશે તો DO કરતાં સારું રહેશે. વોટ ઇઝ ધી એપ્રોક્સિમેટ કોલેજ ફીઝ ફોર ધી ડોક્ટર્સ ડિગ્રી? કેટલી હોય છે પર યર?
For medical school, it can vary. So
સ્કૂલ ટુ સ્કૂલ?
So there's a lot of schools, typically the ones that are have a lot of funding, like you think of like Harvard or Yale or Columbia, they have a lot more money, and so they offer what's called scholarships. And so it's, if you get accepted to those schools, you might attend for a lower price. But typically for public, like a state medical school, you're looking at some tuition that might be, it can be like 30 to 40,000 a year, just tuition, not including housing and things.
Okay.
So when you private schools around 65,000, but overall, like if you go, most people end up going to private schools because each state only has, if Massachusetts, for example, there's only one state medical school, UMass, and so if you don't get into UMass, and because all these schools are so small, you can't really, maybe you don't get into your state medical school, you might go to some other private medical school somewhere else, or an out-of-state school. You're probably going to end up paying, like, let's say no scholarships, no financial aid, 60,000 plus housing, all the other things. It's about 90 to 100,000 a year, and so you're looking at for a lot of students, $300,000 to $400,000 for the 4 years.
4 years. Okay, so that's a big investment.
Yeah,
you definitely need a student loan.
Yeah.
So જયનું એવું કેવું છે કે જે સ્કૂલની ફીઝ હોય છે ટિપિકલી એ પબ્લિક સ્કૂલ હોય તો એમાં $30,000 to $40,000 પર યર, અને પ્રાઇવેટ સ્કૂલમાં જાઓ તો અપ ટુ 60,000. આ ટ્યુશનની વાત છે, અને પ્લસ રહેવાનું, ખાવા પીવાનું એ બધા ખર્ચા થઈને ટિપિકલી $90,000 to $100,000 પર યર જેટલો ખર્ચો એક સ્ટુડન્ટને થઈ શકે છે. વોટ ઇઝ અ નોર્મલ ડે ફોર અ સ્ટુડન્ટ? તમે સ્કૂલમાં હો, મેડિકલ સ્કૂલમાં, તો વોટ્સ યોર ટિપિકલ ડે લુક્સ લાઈક?
So medical school is kind of divided into two phases. The first 2 years are preclinical, and so you're spending, it's like college. You go to class, you take exams, more of the book stuff. Sometimes you don't have to go to class, it's not mandatory, so it can vary. Like you might for if you're in a busier like block, like anatomy, like I would go to class from 8 to 12, and then I have lab from 1 to 5 or so, and then I'd get home and study. And so it can be pretty busy on certain times. And certain days, when your blocks are easier, you don't have to go to class or lab as much, and so you might just spend the day like going to one class and just study for the rest of the day. But it can vary. Like some people, it's hard to give you like a particular schedule, but I know for the second half of medical school, so the first 2 years are just the book stuff mostly.
Yeah.
The last 2 years are more clinical based. So you're in the clinic, you actually go follow a doctor around, maybe see a few patients on your own by yourself before the doctor comes in. And so that can vary. So if you're online, like family medicine or psychiatry, you might be in the clinic from, you have to get there 8:30 and you're back, you're leaving by like 5 p.m. or so. But if you're on, like surgery or, maybe something that's internal medicine, you might be in the hospital for, until like 10 p.m. And so it can be pretty busy. So you gotta get there early too, like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. So so it can be long days and it can be short days, depending on what kind of phase of medical school you're in. But it's a lot of work. Like, there's no kind of dodging that. Sometimes some weeks are easier, but it's a lot of work.
જયનું એવું કેવું છે કે જે મેડિકલ સ્ટુડન્ટની લાઈફ હોય છે ટિપિકલી ફર્સ્ટ 2 years છે એમાં ભણવાનું, લેબ વર્ક છે એ બધું વધારે હોય છે, અને જે લાસ્ટ 2 years હોય છે એમાં પ્રેક્ટિકલ હોય છે, જ્યાં તમે ઇન્ટરનલ મેડિસિનમાં જે ડૉક્ટર્સ પ્રેક્ટિસ કરતા હોય છે ત્યાં તેમની ઓફિસમાં જઈને જ્યારે પેશન્ટ આવે ત્યારે તમે પહેલાં પેશન્ટને મળો, તેમને ચેક કરો, અને પછી ડૉક્ટર ઓફિસમાં આવીને ચેક કરતા હોય છે પેશન્ટને. એટલે પ્રેક્ટિકલ વર્ક છે એ લાસ્ટ 2 yearsમાં વધારે હોય છે, જ્યારે ફર્સ્ટ 2 yearsમાં બુકીસ ભણવાનું અને લેબ વર્ક એ બધું વધારે હોય છે. ઇઝ ધેર સમથિંગ લાઈક MBBS kind of a degree, or there's no such thing as MBBS?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think is MBBS a master's or doctoral degree in India?
After 12th in India, you get into medical school and you can become MBBS doctor. I think it's a bachelor's degree as a doctor, and after that you can study further and get an MD. That's how it is over there.
Oh.
So there's no such thing as MBBS here,
Yeah.
right? There's no
Yeah.
you either become MD or DO.
That's right.
Okay. So
Yeah, there's no
that's
MBBS.
the difference.
It's just the bachelor's, which can be in anything you want.
Yeah.
And then
MD.
MD or D, which is doctoral degree. And so some people actually, they get dual degrees. And so with
really?
their, like, for example, at my school, they have like MD, PhD students. And so what they do is they,
MD, PhD.
they do the first 2 years of medical school.
Yeah.
Then they do your PhD, which can 4 to maybe even like 6, 7 years, depending on how long your PhD takes.
Yeah.
And you go back to the rotations. And so you get 2 doctoral degrees, and that's for people who kind of want to be a physician, but also spend a lot of time in like a laboratory and be
research.
a scientist.
Okay.
And so that's a longer track, but and they also have like MD, MBA, so you can
MD and then MBA.
MBA,
Okay.
and so you after your second year, you do like a year of like business, and so there's also MD, JD, and so you can get an MD, but also I think they mix in some law school, and it's
really.
It's
Okay.
so you there's like different combinations, but there's no MBBS in the U.S. There's only you get a bachelor's after high school, and then you go on to get an MD or DO.
Okay, thank you for that. So જયે એવું કીધું કે MBBS જેવું કશું હોતું નથી અમેરિકામાં. MD બનો કાં તો DO બનો, પણ MD કરતી વખતે ઘણા બધા ઓપ્શન હોય છે. તમે MBA પણ કરી શકો છો MD ની સાથે. PhD પણ કરી શકો છો, રિસર્ચમાં તમારે ઇન્ટરેસ્ટ હોય તો. એટલે એવા બધા બીજા બધા ડોર્સ પણ ઓપન થઈ જાય છે MD ની સાથે સાથે. After you become doctor, what is the next step? Like, what do people generally do? Do they start their own practice, or do they start working in a hospital, or they pursue towards becoming a specialist? What is the typical trend?
Is this like a for after medical school?
After medical,
okay.
after you become MD, like what is next?
Yeah, so
for a student.
for after you graduate medical school, so in your 4th year of medical school, you actually apply to different specialties, and so it might be different on the countries, but some like you can go into family medicine, internal medicine, general surgery. There's these different residencies you can apply to. So after you graduate, you spend some amount of years doing the training, where basically you get some salary. It's on the lower end compared to relative to how much you'll make as a full like doctor, but you are a doctor, but you're not like licensed. Like you just finished medical school, so you're not like board certified. And so although
also you have to get board certified after you become
in the specialty you're interested in.
In a specialty.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when people refer to specialty, like that can be family medicine, that can be primary care, that can be internal medicine, but can also be other things like dermatology, neurology, psychiatry. And so specialist usually refers to more specific, focusing on a certain part of the body. Maybe like a neurologist might focus on the brain and spinal cord. But like family medicine is still a specialty, but they're not specialists. For example, if you're a family medicine doctor, so you do that training, residency, and then sometimes you do even more training. So let's say you do an orthopedic surgery residency. That's 5 years for orthopedic surgery.
Yeah.
And let's say you want to become a spine surgeon in orthopedic surgery. So that's an extra year. That's a fellowship. And so fellowship's like additional training.
Okay.
And so after that, you have a lot of options as a doctor. Once you're fully board certified in your specialty of interest, you can open your own clinic. It's a bit harder in certain specialties because there's a lot of saturation in the job market.
Yeah.
Commonly, you might be employed by a group or hospital, and so, but there's different settings. So when you think the biggest differentiator in terms of like lifestyle, income, things like that, it's like one is your location. 2, are you in a private practice, or are you in an academic setting, or
in a group?
Privademics, which is like so
both.
academic is when you think of like people want to go onto the professor track, so they might. They do a bit of teaching, they do research on the side.
I see.
And they spend less time seeing patients. They still see patients, but they spend maybe a day or 2 doing research, teaching, things like that, helping training residents, medical students. Whereas if you're in private practice, you're purely just seeing patients for the most part. That's really just
But that's your own private practice, right?
Yeah, or you can work, or you can
or
be
a group, right?
Or a group. You have partners. You have own a private practice, but and then there's a combination of both, where you might kind of be in like a setting where you have your own practice, but you're also affiliated with like a university, and
I see.
you have some teaching or research responsibilities, roles.
Okay, thank you. Very important question from this interview. How much approximately doctors make in America? Like,
So-
what's the income?
It's a tough question to answer, and I'll say this. So, as a doctor, you can do a lot of things. You can do research, you can teach. Generally, when you're seeing patients, and more so if you're doing procedures, right? And this isn't just for like surgeons or anything, but
Yeah.
if you're doing more procedures,
Yeah.
like, let's say, for example, like
Colonoscopy?
colonoscopy, for example.
Yeah.
It's not a surgery, but you're still doing a procedure.
Yeah.
Those get reimbursed. You get paid more. And so if you're in a specialty where you're not doing many procedures, you get paid less. Is also the supply and demand. So it varies. But generally, when people think of doctors in the U.S., you're kind of looking generally, just speaking here, $200,000 to $300,000 a year.
That's
is your
basic,
take
right?
home.
That's,
Yeah.
At least you get that.
Yeah,
per
but
year.
let's say for example you're ophthalmologist. There aren't a lot of ophthalmologists
Okay.
or dermatologists in the U.S. And if you want to work in an area where there aren't many dermatologists, like let's say you're working in some part of America, like let's say like Arkansas, right? Like there's not many dermatologists there. Maybe there's a couple in the area that you live in. And so if you open your own practice there, you can actually get a lot of high volume. And so there are doctors who make upward $700,000, $800,000 a year.
Wow,
If you own your
that's
own, if you own your own practice, you do consulting on the side, and you work a lot.
Yeah.
$1 million is like it's possible. It's hard, but it's possible.
It is
So-
possible. So sky is the limit. Or maybe sky is not the limit.
Yeah, it's more
Yeah.
generally if you're in academics, so if you're doing research, you spend let's say I worked with somebody who they spent 4 days doing research, 1 day seeing patients.
Yeah.
They probably, I don't know their salary, but they probably got paid like $120,000 a year, which is still a really good salary.
Yeah.
But when you take into consideration how much money you're paying for school and stuff,
Yeah.
generally, you can kind of expect upward, with inflation and everything, 250,000, maybe if you're
At least.
specialist, 300 to 350,000. It
Because
varies.
I know that there is too much tax you have to pay back too.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
As you earn more money, you are into higher tax bracket, so you are just paying so much tax.
That's true.
So પણ બેસિકલી તમને વાત કરું દર્શક મિત્રો તો ડૉક્ટર બન્યા પછી ઓછામાં ઓછું 120,000 થી ચાલુ થાય અને 200-300,000 જેટલા ડૉક્ટર કમાતા હોય છે અમેરિકાની અંદર. અને જયે કીધું એ રીતે તમે સ્પેશિયાલિસ્ટ બનો, કોઈ એવા એરિયામાં તમે પ્રેક્ટિસ કરો ત્યાં તમે $700,000-800,000 સુધી પણ કમાઈ શકો છો. પણ આ બધા પૈસા કે ઇન્કમ જોઈને લોભાઈ ના જવું. મારું પર્સનલ હું તમને ઓપિનિયન આપું છું. તમને ખરેખર જેન્યુઇનલી ઇન્ટરેસ્ટ હોય પેશન્ટને મદદ કરવામાં કે ડૉક્ટર બનવામાં તો જ ડૉક્ટરની લાઇનમાં જવું. કારણ કે જે પૈસા દેખાય છે તેની સામે લાઈફ એટલી ઇઝી નથી હોતી. એઝ એ સ્ટુડન્ટ પણ તમારે સતત વાંચવાનું અને ઘણી બધી તૈયારીઓ કરવાની અને ડૉક્ટરની લાઈફ ખૂબ જ હેક્ટિક હોય છે અહીંયા અમેરિકાની અંદર. સવારે જઈએ એક વાત કરી હતી કે 4 વાગે પણ તમારે ઉઠીને જવું પડે. ડૉક્ટર્સ ઓન કોલ પણ રહેતા હોય છે. જ્યારે ઓફિસ બંધ થઈ જાય ત્યારે અડધી રાત્રે તમને ફોન પણ આવી શકે છે. તમે સ્પેશિયાલિસ્ટ હો તો સર્જરી કરવા માટે પણ તમારે દોડવું પડે છે. એટલે ખાલી પૈસા કમાવાના હેતુથી ડૉક્ટર બનવું યોગ્ય નથી એવું મારું માનવું છે. આઈ હોપ કે જય પણ સહેમત હશે એનાથી, રાઈટ? You just don't become doctor to just to make money, right? You have to have that intention in your mind to
hopefully
help
not.
people. Right? Right? Because it's not easy life,
Yeah.
right?
You can-
It's not lucrative like okay, you can work from home. You can.
Yeah.
Right?
It's good to have that interest. So one thing is you can have an easier life as a doctor. Like if you're if you're in the right setting and the right practice.
Okay.
Maybe there are some doctors who work 4 days a week. They get home by 6 p.m.
True.
But I think the steps needed to get to there,
Yeah.
the medical school, the preparation, the long hours there, and then like the training, that's going to be hard. Like you can't avoid. So that's a big chunk of your life where you're spending a lot of time working.
Yeah.
And so
that 10 years, 10 to 14 years, that's a long time.
once that's done, you can have a relatively easier or
Better life.
like normal life relative to people who work like a normal job. But some it's you have a lot of responsibilities, especially if you're in a more like if you're on call depending on your practice. So that can that's something to take into consideration. But yeah, it is very important to have that interest because although money is important to take into consideration, you wouldn't want to spend 14 years and get paid nothing, but it's it is important to have that intrinsic motivation or drive to want to do medicine. And so that's really why medical schools, they like to see that you've done clinical experience.
Okay.
They like to see that you've shadowed a doctor, you've worked maybe as like a
Assistant.
a tech or assistant,
Yeah.
some kind of role, you've volunteered in a hospital, things like that, because they want to see that you know what it's like to be a doctor. Because it's as a in high school you're just looking at books. You don't really know what it's like to.
Yeah.
It's different when you're when you're older and like you have to go in at like let's say middle of the night to help a patient. It's like it can be hard, and like when you're studying like or spending a lot of time working. So that's important. That's my long answer to your short question.
No, that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Anything coming from you is very important for the viewers. So that's really good. So these were my questions. However, if I have missed anything, any particular information which could be useful for students, you can add if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think with medicine, it's it can be a long path, and so especially if you want to also go into specialty that takes many years, or you want to do become a scientist as well, or get a dual degree, it can be a long path, and so you have to make sure you really enjoy what you're doing, because you're spending a lot of time. And I know some people who they got an MD, PhD, they went to especially like cardiology or something. They spent like by the time they're fully trained, they're like 37, 38 years old, and you have to really enjoy the journey and what you do.
That's a very nice message. Yes.
And it's a great field. There are a lot of options. So it's not, you can do research, you can teach, you can do consulting. And so, there's a lot of great options, but, it's a great field too, because especially if you like the biological sciences, if you like the application of that science to, help, other people in the setting like, of a clinical realm. But it's important to really enjoy that. And so if you're in middle school, high school, or you have kids in middle school, high school, try to get them to shadow a doctor, or follow a doctor around for a day or two. Like if they like biology, that's a good sign. Like if you like human physiology, that's a good sign. But you have to it helps if you have an interest in these things, because it's a great field. You can it's very intellectually stimulating in some areas. Yeah, there is a lot of memorization, but there are a lot of areas where there's a lot of areas of medicine that are exciting, that are evolving, and there's a lot of great technology coming out, and a lot of outcomes for patients are getting better as the years pass. But my biggest advice would be to keep an open mind and really explore aspects of medicine. So if you go shadow a family medicine doctor, go shadow a neurologist, go see what it's like early on. So people focus a lot on grades, and grades are very important, but I know even if you didn't do well in high school, or you didn't get good grades in middle school, high school, it's you can still get into medical school if there's ways to kind of learn to figure out I think a lot of skills in life can be learned through practice and through help from others. And so if you're in college and you're struggling, do ask for help. And there are ways to get into medical school. You can do additional classes after you graduate, a master's, things like that. And so there are a lot of possibilities and ways to enter into medicine, but definitely explore the field, and make sure you kind of have that drive throughout the whole process.
All right, so Jay, you gave such a great information. It will be really helpful to all the students who want to pursue medical school in America, અને જે લોકો પણ ડૉક્ટર બનવા માંગે છે અમેરિકાની અંદર, તે માટે જયે ખૂબ જ સરસ ઇન્ફોર્મેશન આપી છે આ વિડીયો દ્વારા. તો હું થેન્કફુલ છું જયનો. જય,
Thanks so much for having me on the video.
Thank you so much. સો આપણે જયનો આભાર માનીએ. જો તમને આ ઇન્ફોર્મેશન કામની લાગી હોય તો નીચે કોમેન્ટ જરૂરથી કરજો, જેથી કરીને અમને લોકોને પ્રોત્સાહન મળતું રહે આ પ્રકારનું કોન્ટેન્ટ તમારી વચ્ચે લાવવા માટે. વિડીયો જો ગમ્યો હોય તો વિડીયોને લાઇક કરજો. ચેનલ પર જો નવા હો તો ચેનલને સબસ્ક્રાઈબ કરજો. અને જે કોઈ પણ તમારા ફેમિલીમાં કે ફ્રેન્ડમાં ડૉક્ટર બનવા માંગે છે, જેને અમેરિકામાં ડૉક્ટર બનવું છે, તેને ઇન્ફોર્મેશન જોઈતી હોય તો આ વિડીયો જરૂરથી શેર કરજો. મળીશું પાછા આપણે નવા વિડીયોમાં. ત્યાં સુધી તમે લોકો કરો જલસા.